When you look at people from the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and even the 70s, you just don't see that many Americans being overweight and obese. And of course, in this modern age, most people are overweight. And you think to yourself, well, what happened? How can this be? And as a naturopathic doctor, I know this history, but not everybody does. So I was at dinner a couple of nights ago with a big group of people, and the gentleman next to me was an attorney and, a very educated person. And I mentioned to this person about how executives from the tobacco industry had moved over into the food industry, and that's how we got so many addictive chemicals and things added to the food.
In 1985, tobacco giant R.J. Reynolds bought Nabisco Foods. Tobacco pioneer Philip Morris bought General Foods, and 3 years later, Kraft Foods, making them the largest food producer in North America, and leaving the business of food in the capable hands of the same corporations who helped addict us to tobacco. Using the same tactics they used to promote tobacco, food companies set about peddling the entire planet a diet of processed goods, loaded with chemicals and additives, masquerading as food. This new machine operates with specific targets in mind, like addicting consumers without them knowing it.
So I want to help you guys to understand what has happened to our food and why it has happened to our food. Because it's very common that people who struggle over here can go to Europe or another foreign country, eat the same food there. Bread, for example, that's a big one that people have to give up, and they're fine over there. So here's the actual story. So in 1964, the Surgeon General came out with a report that linked smoking to cancer. And the major tobacco companies decided, the end is in sight. We've got to diversify here because our profit margins are going to suffer as all these people stop smoking. At the time, most people smoked, most adults smoked. And even when you go back in history, doctors were recommending smoking to pregnant women. They recommended smoking as being medicinal. So what happened is these tobacco giants like Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds bought major food corporations, including Kraft, General Foods, and Nabisco. And they transferred their corporate staff, their marketing staff, and their engineering techniques to the processed food industry. So here's a few examples. So Philip Morris purchased General Foods in 1985 and Kraft in 1988. R.J. Reynolds bought Nabisco in 1985. Now, when you look these companies up, you'll see massive brands that fall under those general corporate names. So the tobacco executives were installed in these food companies to apply the addiction model to food. So it was very successful in tobacco, and that's what started this conversation with my friend, because I had a while back, he smoked cigarettes, and I had said, well, look, just switch to American Spirit because it doesn't have all the chemicals in it. And so we were talking about how that was going for him, and he's like, they just are not as good to me as they used to be. And I was like, well, that's because it doesn't have all the chemicals in there, making you crave more. And then that devolved into this food conversation. And so they applied the addiction model to the food, and they focused on engineering hyper palatable products that feel and taste so good that you just want to keep going and keep going. They installed something called bliss point engineering. So the tobacco engineers applied their knowledge of flavors and chemical additives to create foods with the perfect combination of sugar, fat, and salt, known as the bliss point, to maximize cravings and overconsumption. And then the tactics that were used in tobacco to sell cigarettes, like targeting children. So they targeted children, they used loyalty programs like Kool-Aid points as a Marlboro country store model, and they were applied to products like Kool-Aid, Tang, and Lunchables. So research indicates that foods produced by these tobacco-owned companies were significantly more likely to be hyperpalatable compared to competitors. And so, of course, once the model is proven, everybody else is going to jump on board. And I have filmed multiple videos about fast food and how many chemicals are in French fries, for example, compared to when they were what they used to be in the 1960s. So these principles have been applied across the board because it makes us crave these awful foods. We're not really satisfied when we eat them because we're not getting the nutrition, we're not getting the fiber, we're not getting the things that we need, so we're still hungry. And that is why most of the population has some degree of being overweight today.